My name is Victoria Ashworth, and this is the story of how my sister tried to humiliate me as her jobless little sister in front of her entire company, only to watch in horror as her CEO introduced me as their new executive director. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air in Rosewood Heights carried the scent of expensive perfume and corporate ambition as I stepped out of my modest sedan in the parking lot of Meridian Financial Group's annual company retreat. The sprawling conference center, nestled among the rolling hills of wine country, was exactly the kind of place my sister Penelope would choose to showcase her success. Everything about this weekend screamed prestige, from the valet parking to the marble fountain at the entrance, to the string quartet playing softly in the background. I smoothed down my simple black dress, the one I'd worn to 3 job interviews this month, and checked my reflection in the car window. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun, professional but understated. Nothing like Penelope's signature platinum blonde waves that cost more than my monthly rent. As I walked toward the entrance, I could already hear the buzz of conversation from inside. The sound of ambitious professionals, networking, deal-making, and climbing whatever ladder they'd set their sights on. Penelope had invited me to this retreat with what I now recognized as calculated kindness. "You should come, Vic," she'd said over coffee last week, using the childhood nickname that somehow always sounded condescending when it came from her lips. "You've been out of work for so long, maybe you'll meet someone who can help you find something suitable." The word suitable had hung in the air like a judgment. In Penelope's world, suitable meant entry-level, safe, something appropriate for someone who had been between opportunities for the past 8 months. What she didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that those 8 months hadn't been spent desperately job hunting. They'd been spent in intense negotiations, due diligence meetings, and strategic planning sessions that would change the trajectory of my entire career. But I'd learned long ago to keep my victories quiet around Penelope. She had a way of diminishing achievements that threatened her position as the family's golden child. Better to let her maintain her narrative of success while I worked quietly in the shadows. The retreat center's lobby was a testament to understated luxury. Exposed wooden beams stretched across vaulted ceilings, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the Sonoma Valley vineyards. Employees of Meridian Financial Group clustered in small groups, their conversations a mix of business strategy and weekend small talk. The men wore expensive suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, while the women navigated the social terrain in designer dresses and perfectly manicured confidence. I spotted Penelope immediately. She stood near the registration table, holding court with a group of senior managers. Her laughter just a little too loud, her gestures just a little too animated. She wore a burgundy dress that hugged her curves perfectly, paired with shoes that probably cost more than my car payment. Everything about her presence screamed, "Notice me, validate me, acknowledge my importance." At 28, Penelope had clawed her way up to senior account manager at Meridian Financial Group, one of the most prestigious investment firms on the West Coast. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, landed her dream job straight out of college, and had been steadily climbing the corporate ladder ever since. Our parents never missed an opportunity to mention her success at family gatherings, often in the same breath as gentle inquiries about when I might get back on track. As I approached the registration table, I could hear fragments of her conversation. She was discussing market trends with the kind of confident authority that came from someone who'd memorized the Wall Street Journal every morning for the past 6 years. Her colleagues hung on every word, nodding appreciatively as she dissected the latest Federal Reserve decisions and their potential impact on their client portfolios. "Penelope," I said softly, touching her shoulder. She turned, and for just a moment, I saw genuine surprise flash across her face before it was replaced by her practiced professional smile. "Victoria, you made it." She leaned in for a quick hug that smelled like her signature Chanel perfume. "Everyone, this is my little sister, Victoria. The emphasis on little wasn't lost on anyone, though it had nothing to do with age. We were only 18 months apart. It was about hierarchy, about position, about who had earned the right to stand in these circles, and who was here as a guest. Victoria's been taking some time to figure things out, Penelope continued, her voice carrying just enough concern to sound caring while making it clear that I was the family project. You know how it is in today's job market. So competitive, especially when you don't have the right connections. I smiled politely and shook hands with her colleagues, noting how their attention shifted away from me almost immediately. I was the unemployed sister, the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happened when you didn't play the game by their rules. In their world, an employment gap was like a scarlet letter, evidence of failure, lack of ambition, or worse, incompetence. What they couldn't see was the secure phone in my purse that had been buzzing with messages from headhunters, board members, and CEOs for the past month. What they couldn't know was that my unemployment had been a carefully orchestrated transition period, negotiated as part of a package deal that would be announced to the financial world in exactly 72 hours. But for now, I was content to play the role Penelope had written for me. After all, the best plot twists were the ones nobody saw coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cocktail reception was in full swing by the time I made my way to the main ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled crowd of Meridian Financial Group's elite, while servers in crisp white uniforms weaved between guests carrying silver trays of champagne and artisanal hors d'oeuvre. The room hummed with a particular energy that came from putting 200 ambitious professionals in one space, part celebration, part strategic positioning, part barely concealed competition. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and took a moment to observe the intricate social choreography unfolding around me. This wasn't just a company party. It was a carefully orchestrated display of hierarchy, where every conversation, every handshake, every laugh served a purpose in the complex web of corporate advancement. Near the center of the room, I spotted the senior partners holding court. These were the titans of Meridian Financial Group, the men and women who controlled billions in assets and could make or break careers with a single decision. They stood in a loose circle, their body language relaxed but purposeful, discussing what I could only assume were matters of significant financial importance. Occasionally, one of them would gesture toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the vineyard-covered hills, as if the beauty of the landscape itself was just another asset to be appreciated and leveraged. Circling this inner sanctum were the senior directors and vice presidents, the hungry wolves who had proven themselves worthy of proximity to power but not yet admission to the inner circle. They laughed a little too enthusiastically at the partners' jokes, nodded with exaggerated understanding at their observations, and seized every opportunity to contribute to the conversation without overstepping their carefully defined boundaries. And then there was Penelope, working the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had mastered the art of corporate networking. She moved from group to group like a skilled diplomat, her burgundy dress and confident smile serving as her calling cards. I watched as she approached a cluster of senior managers, immediately positioning herself where she could be seen by the partners, while engaging in animated conversation about quarterly projections. Penelope's really something, isn't she? I turned to find a woman about my age, standing beside me, holding a glass of white wine and observing the same scene I'd been watching. She had short auburn hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses, and something about her demeanor suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable in this environment either. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met," I said, extending my hand. "Victoria Ashworth." "Rachel Manning," she replied with a warm smile. "I'm in the research department. And yes, I know who you are. Penelope's mentioned you several times. Though I have to say, her descriptions were interesting." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting how?" Rachel glanced around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. "Let's just say she has a very particular way of talking about family. Always very protective, very concerned about your well-being. I couldn't help but smile at Rachel's diplomatic phrasing. Ah, the bless her heart approach to sisterly love. Exactly, Rachel laughed. Though between you and me, I've always found it curious. She talks about you like you're some kind of lost soul, but there's something in her voice when she does it, almost like she's trying to convince herself as much as everyone else. Before I could respond, Penelope's voice cut through the ambient conversation like a blade. Victoria? There you are. She approached us with the determined stride of someone on a mission, her smile bright but her eyes calculating. I've been looking everywhere for you. There are some people I absolutely must introduce you to. Rachel and I exchanged a quick glance, hers sympathetic, mine resigned. I'll catch up with you later, Rachel said quietly, melting back into the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who knew how to navigate corporate politics without drawing unwanted attention. Penelope linked her arm through mine with the kind of possessive affection that looked caring from the outside but felt controlling from within. Come on, she said, steering me toward a group of impeccably dressed executives. These are some of the most influential people in the company. You never know. Maybe one of them will have a connection that could help you out. As we approached the group, I could see Penelope's face transform into what I'd come to think of as her networking mode, a carefully calibrated blend of confidence, charm, and strategic vulnerability that she'd perfected over years of corporate ladder climbing. She was about to use me as a prop in her own performance, a living testament to her compassion and family values. Everyone, she announced as we joined the circle, I'd like you to meet my sister Victoria. She's been taking some time to explore her options after leaving her last position. The phrase, leaving her last position, was vintage Penelope, technically accurate but deliberately misleading. It suggested a voluntary departure rather than what everyone in the room would assume: termination, downsizing, or failure to meet expectations. It was the kind of linguistic sleight of hand that allowed her to appear supportive while subtly reinforcing the narrative of my professional struggles. Victoria, this is David Chen, our Senior Vice President of Client Relations, Penelope continued, gesturing toward a distinguished man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and an expensive watch. And this is Jennifer Walsh, Director of Strategic Planning, and Mark Rodriguez, our Head of Investment Advisory Services. Each introduction was accompanied by a brief recitation of their credentials, their years with the company, their educational backgrounds, their recent achievements. It was meant to impress me, to show me the caliber of people Penelope worked with, but it also served another purpose. It established the vast gulf between their success and my apparent lack thereof. It's wonderful to meet you all, I said, shaking hands and maintaining the kind of polite, deferential demeanor that Penelope clearly expected from me. Penelope speaks so highly of everyone here. Your sister is quite the rising star, David Chen said warmly, though I noticed his attention was already beginning to drift. She's been instrumental in several of our major client acquisitions this year. Penelope practically glowed at the praise. I've been very fortunate to work with such an incredible team, she said with false modesty. Though I have to admit, it's been challenging to balance the demands of the job with family concerns. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, the gesture simultaneously affectionate and patronizing. The implication was clear. I was the family concern, the problem that required her attention and care, the burden that made her professional achievements all the more impressive. In Penelope's carefully constructed narrative, she wasn't just successful. She was successful despite having to support her struggling younger sister. Jennifer Walsh smiled sympathetically. Family is so important, she said. It's wonderful that you're able to be there for each other during difficult transitions. The word transitions hung in the air like a euphemism for failure. I was the transition, the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happened when you didn't have the right connections, the right education, or the right opportunities. In their world of power lunches and seven-figure deals, I represented everything they had worked so hard to avoid becoming. What none of them knew What Penelope herself didn't know was that while they were discussing quarterly projections and client portfolios, I had spent the morning in a secure conference room 300 miles away, finalizing the details of an acquisition that would reshape their entire industry. The papers were signed, the press releases were drafted, and in less than 72 hours, their carefully ordered world would be turned completely upside down. But for now, I smiled politely and played my assigned role in Penelope's theater of success, knowing that sometimes the best performance was the one where the audience never saw the twist coming. The dinner that followed was an elegant affair held in the resort's grand dining hall, complete with round tables draped in ivory linens and centerpieces of autumn flowers that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. I found myself seated at what was clearly designated as a family and guests table, far enough from the executive tables to make the hierarchy obvious, but close enough that conversations could still be overheard by those who mattered. Penelope had orchestrated the seating arrangement with military precision. She positioned herself at the table closest to the senior partners, ensuring maximum visibility while placing me at a table that included spouses, adult children of employees, and other plus ones who weren't part of the corporate inner circle. The message was unmistakable. I was here as her guest, her charity case, her demonstration of family loyalty despite personal cost. Seated next to me was Harold Pemberton, a jovial man in his 60s whose wife worked in human resources, and across from me sat Miranda Ashford, the 20-something daughter of one of the senior partners, who was clearly uncomfortable being surrounded by people she considered beneath her social station. The conversation at our table centered around safe topics: the beautiful venue, the excellent wine selection, the unseasonably warm weather, while the real business discussions happened at the tables where people wore the invisible crown of corporate significance. Midway through the main course, Penelope stood up at her table and tapped her wine glass with her knife, the crystal chime cutting through the ambient conversation. The dining hall gradually fell silent as all eyes turned toward her, and I felt my stomach clench with a familiar dread. I knew that look on her face, the particular combination of confidence and calculated vulnerability that meant she was about to make a speech that would somehow manage to elevate herself while diminishing someone else. "I hope you'll forgive me for interrupting dinner," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room with the practiced projection of someone comfortable commanding attention. "But I wanted to take a moment to express how grateful I am to be part of the Meridian Financial Group family." Polite applause rippled through the room, and I noticed several of the senior partners nodding approvingly. Penelope had chosen her moment perfectly. Late enough in the evening that people were relaxed from wine, but early enough that she still had their full attention. "As many of you know," she continued, "I've been with Meridian for 6 years now, and it's been the most rewarding experience of my professional life. This company doesn't just invest in market opportunities, it invests in people. It believes in lifting others up, in creating opportunities for growth and success." She paused for effect, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing on our table, "which is why I'm so excited to share that my sister Victoria is here with us tonight. Many of you met her earlier, and I know she's been impressed by the caliber of people who make Meridian Financial Group what it is." A spotlight of attention suddenly focused on me, and I felt every eye in the room turning to assess, evaluate, and categorize. I managed what I hoped was a gracious smile and raised my hand in a small wave, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. "Victoria has been going through a challenging period in her career," Penelope continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing a personal struggle for the greater good. "Like so many talented people in today's competitive job market, she's discovered that having skills isn't always enough. Sometimes you need connections, mentorship, and most importantly, you need people who believe in your potential." The room murmured sympathetically, and I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and rage. Penelope was using my supposed unemployment as a teaching moment, turning my presence into a parable about the importance of networking and corporate loyalty. She was positioning herself as the successful sister who hadn't forgotten her obligations to family, while simultaneously reinforcing everyone's assumptions about my professional failures. I've watched Victoria struggle to find her place in the world, she said, her voice catching slightly with what sounded like genuine emotion but felt like calculated manipulation. She's brilliant. She really is. But sometimes brilliance isn't enough. Sometimes you need someone to open doors for you, to show you how the real world works. She gestured toward the executive tables where the senior partners sat, their faces displaying varying degrees of polite interest and barely concealed impatience. That's what Meridian Financial Group represents to me. It's not just a company, it's a community. It's a place where people look out for each other, where success isn't just individual achievement, but collective growth. The applause was more enthusiastic this time, and I could see several people nodding along with her message. Penelope had expertly woven together themes of corporate loyalty, family values, and personal triumph in a way that made everyone feel good about themselves, while establishing her credentials as both a successful professional and a caring sister. "So I want to publicly thank everyone here tonight," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "Thank you for creating an environment where people like me can thrive. And thank you for being the kind of people who understand that success comes with responsibility. Responsibility to mentor, to guide, and to lift up those who haven't been as fortunate." The entire room stood for the toast, glasses raised in a collective celebration of their own magnanimity. I stood with them, my smile feeling like it was carved from stone, my hand trembling slightly as I raised my glass. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Here I was, being toasted as an object of corporate charity by people who had no idea that within days I would be in a position to acquire their entire company if I chose to. As the applause died down and conversations resumed, I noticed that the quality of attention directed toward me had shifted. Before Penelope's speech, I had been invisible, irrelevant, easily dismissed. Now I was visible in the worst possible way, as a cautionary tale, an object of pity, a reminder of what happened when you didn't play the game correctly. Margaret Sinclair, the wife of one of the senior partners, leaned across the table toward me with the kind of aggressive sympathy that wealthy women sometimes directed toward the less fortunate. "It's so wonderful that Penelope is looking out for you, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're so lucky to have a sister who's willing to use her connections to help. Not everyone would be so generous." "Penelope has always been very protective," I managed to reply, choosing my words carefully. "It must be difficult," chimed in Harrison Blackwell, a senior manager who had apparently decided to join the conversation about my professional shortcomings. "The job market these days is just brutal, especially if you don't have the right background or connections. But don't worry, Penelope has real influence here. I'm sure she'll be able to find something suitable for you." That word again, suitable. It followed me like a curse, defining the boundaries of what people thought I was capable of achieving. In their minds, I wasn't someone who could compete at their level. I was someone who needed to be found something suitable, something appropriate for my limited capabilities and unfortunate circumstances. "Actually," said Jennifer Walsh, who had approached our table during the speech, "we might have an opening in our administrative support division. It's entry-level, but it could be a good way to get your foot in the door. Penelope speaks so highly of your potential." The pause before potential spoke volumes. It was corporate speak for "we're doing this as a favor," not because we actually believe in your abilities. I was being offered the kind of job that companies created for the relatives of valued employees. Something with a title that sounded respectable, but came with minimal responsibility and even less opportunity for advancement. "That's very kind of you to consider," I said, maintaining my composure even as I felt the walls closing in around me. "I'll definitely think about it." As the evening wound down and people began making their way back to their rooms, Penelope appeared at my side, her face glowing with satisfaction. "I think that went really well," she said, linking her arm through mine in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. "Did you hear Jennifer mention that administrative position? That could be perfect for you, a chance to learn the business from the ground up." I nodded mechanically, not trusting myself to speak. The irony was overwhelming. In trying to help me, Penelope had actually made my eventual revelation even more devastating. She had just spent the evening painting me as a failure in front of everyone who would soon discover that I was about to become their new director. But as we walked through the resort's elegant corridors toward our rooms, I found myself almost grateful for her performance. After all, the higher the pedestal someone builds for themselves, the farther they have to fall when the truth finally comes to light. Back in the privacy of my hotel room, I finally allowed myself to exhale the breath I felt like I'd been holding all evening. The burgundy curtains were drawn against the night sky, and the only sound was the distant hum of the resort's fountain echoing through the walls. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of water from the complimentary bottle on the nightstand, and sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. What Penelope didn't know, what nobody at that dinner knew, except for the secure phone buzzing silently in my purse, was that her unemployed little sister had just orchestrated the largest financial technology acquisition in the industry's history. For the past 8 months, while my family assumed I was desperately sending out resumes and failing at interviews, I had been serving as the interim chief executive officer of Quantum Dynamic Solutions, a financial technology company that I had helped build from a small startup into a major player in the digital banking revolution. The unemployment that Penelope loved to reference in her concerned sister routine was actually a carefully negotiated sabbatical that had allowed me to focus entirely on preparing QDS for acquisition by one of the industry's giants. I reached for my purse and pulled out the secure satellite phone that had been my lifeline to the real world for months. The screen showed 14 missed calls and 23 encrypted messages, all marked with the red priority flag that meant the deal was moving into its final phases. Tomorrow morning, while Penelope was networking over mimosas at the resort's breakfast buffet, I would be participating in a conference call that would finalize the sale of Quantum Dynamic Solutions to Meridian Financial Group for $2.4 billion. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Meridian Financial Group, Penelope's beloved company, the corporation that represented everything she had worked so hard to achieve, was about to acquire my company. More than that, they were about to acquire me as part of the deal. The merger agreement included a mandatory 3-year executive contract that would make me the youngest executive director in Meridian's 150-year history. I scrolled through the messages on my phone, each one a reminder of the world that existed parallel to the one where I sat politely while people discussed finding me suitable employment. There was a message from Rebecca Torres, the lead partner at Stonehaven Capital, congratulating me on the deal of the decade. Another from James Liu, CEO of Deutsche Financial International, expressing interest in poaching me once my non-compete clause expired. A third from Patricia Valdez, the journalist from Financial Times who had been tracking the acquisition rumors for weeks, asking for an exclusive interview once the news broke. But the most important message was from Douglas Richmond, the CEO of Meridian Financial Group himself. The timestamp showed it had been sent just 2 hours ago, while I was sitting at that dinner table listening to his employees discuss my employment prospects. Victoria, the message read, "Final board approval unanimous. Press conference scheduled for Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific. Your leadership during transition period has been exemplary. Looking forward to working together as colleagues. Welcome to the Meridian family." Douglas? I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Welcome to the Meridian family. The man had no idea that I had already been introduced to his company tonight as the poor relation, the charity case, the sister who needed their help to find her place in the world. The truth was even more complex than simple corporate acquisition. 2 years ago, when Quantum Dynamic Solutions was still a mid-sized company struggling to compete with the industry giants, I had approached Meridian Financial Group about a strategic partnership. The preliminary meetings had gone well. Too well, in fact. Meridian's board had been so impressed with QDS's proprietary algorithms and market position, that they had quietly begun planning a full acquisition. What they discovered during their due diligence process was that QDS wasn't just another tech company with promising software. We had developed a revolutionary approach to financial risk assessment that could potentially save major investment firms billions of dollars in bad investments. Our artificial intelligence systems could predict market fluctuations with an accuracy rate that was unprecedented in the industry. In short, we weren't just a nice addition to their portfolio, we were potentially the future of financial analysis. The acquisition negotiations had been conducted with the kind of secrecy that would make CIA operatives proud. Non-disclosure agreements so comprehensive that even my own legal team had to sign additional confidentiality clauses. The financial press had been circulating rumors for months, but the companies involved had maintained such tight operational security that even industry insiders could only speculate about the details. As interim CEO, I had been the primary point of contact throughout the entire process. I had sat across conference tables from Meridian's senior partners, presenting quarterly projections and strategic growth plans, with the same confidence that Penelope displayed when discussing her client portfolios. The difference was that my presentations were determining the future direction of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, while hers were focused on individual investment accounts. The personal cost of maintaining this secrecy had been enormous. I had watched my family's perception of me shift from mild disappointment to active concern to barely concealed pity. I had endured countless conversations about getting back out there and maybe considering a different career path, and it's never too late to go back to school. I had smiled politely through well-meaning suggestions about networking events and entry-level positions and the importance of starting small and working your way up. My parents had stopped asking about my job search entirely, which was somehow worse than their previous attempts at helpful suggestions. My mother now changed the subject whenever employment came up in conversation, while my father had begun making pointed comments about the importance of practical career choices and financial stability. At family gatherings, I had become the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happened when you took risks that didn't pay off. Only my grandmother had seemed to suspect that there was more to my story than I was sharing. During our last phone call, she had asked me directly if I was really as lost as everyone thinks you are. When I assured her that I was exactly where I needed to be, she had simply said, "Good. Sometimes the best victories are the ones nobody sees coming." I checked the time on my phone, 11:47 p.m. In exactly 9 hours and 13 minutes, I would receive the final confirmation that the acquisition was complete. 3 hours after that, I would participate in a conference call where Douglas Richmond would officially announce my appointment as Executive Director of Strategic Innovation, a newly created position that would make me responsible for integrating QDS's technology across all of Meridian's operations. The position came with a salary that was larger than anything Penelope had ever imagined, stock options that would make me a millionaire several times over, and most importantly, direct report status to the CEO himself. In the corporate hierarchy that I had observed so carefully tonight, I would be stepping into a position that ranked above every single person who had offered me their sympathy and their suitable employment opportunities. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, looking out over the vineyard where tomorrow's breakfast would be served. Somewhere in this resort, Penelope was probably on her phone, sending follow-up messages to the contacts she had made tonight, cementing relationships that she believed would define her career trajectory. She had no idea that the trajectory was about to change dramatically for both of us. As I finally turned off the lights and prepared for what might be the last night of my secret life, I found myself almost sad that the charade was coming to an end. There had been something oddly liberating about being underestimated, about moving through the world without the weight of other people's expectations and ambitions. Tomorrow, everything would change, and I would have to step into the spotlight that I had been avoiding for so long. But first, I had one more breakfast to endure as the unemployed little sister. After that, Penelope and everyone else would finally discover exactly what kind of suitable position I had found for myself. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with golden sunlight streaming across the vineyard that served as the backdrop for the resort's elaborate breakfast buffet. I had been awake since 5 a.m., participating in a final conference call with the legal teams in New York and London, confirming that all regulatory approvals were in place for the 9 a.m. announcement. By the time I made my way to the terrace where the Meridian Financial Group employees were gathering for their farewell breakfast, the deal that would reshape both our companies was already irreversibly in motion. The breakfast setup was quintessentially Meridian, elegant without being ostentatious, with round tables draped in crisp white linens and centerpieces of local wildflowers. Servers moved efficiently between tables, ensuring that coffee cups remained full and that the selection of pastries, fresh fruit, and artisanal breakfast items met the exacting standards that these employees had come to expect from their corporate events. I chose a table toward the edge of the terrace, close enough to observe the social dynamics, but far enough from the center of activity to avoid drawing attention. Penelope was already holding court at a prime table near the balcony railing, regaling a group of colleagues with what appeared to be an animated story about last night's dinner. I could see her gesturing toward my table occasionally, and I suspected that my public humiliation had become part of her repertoire of networking anecdotes. As I sipped my coffee and picked at a croissant, I checked my secure phone discreetly. The final message I had been waiting for appeared at exactly 8:47 a.m. All systems go. Press release live in 13 minutes. Board call immediately following. Congratulations, Director Ashworth. Dr. Douglas Richmond's message was followed immediately by another from Rebecca Torres at Stonehaven Capital. Just got word from NYSE. Trading halt on Merg stock until announcement. This is really happening, Victoria. You've just made financial history. I closed the phone and tried to focus on appearing relaxed, but my heart was pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. In 13 minutes, every person at this breakfast would receive a push notification on their phones that would fundamentally alter their understanding of who I was and where I fit in their carefully ordered corporate hierarchy. It was then that I noticed the commotion at Douglas Richmond's table. The CEO of Meridian Financial Group had arrived late to breakfast, which was unusual for a man known for his punctuality. He was deep in conversation with his chief of staff, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Reynolds, who rarely appeared at company social events. Both of them looked tense, and I could see Catherine repeatedly checking her phone while Douglas gestured emphatically toward the main conference room inside the resort. Within minutes, the tension had spread to the senior partners table. James Morrison, the chief financial officer, received a phone call that caused him to stand abruptly and walk away from the terrace, his voice urgent but too low to overhear. Patricia Hendricks, the chief operating officer, was typing furiously on her laptop, while simultaneously participating in what appeared to be a heated conversation with the head of legal affairs. The carefully orchestrated atmosphere of leisurely corporate camaraderie was beginning to fracture, and I realized that word of the acquisition was beginning to leak despite all the secrecy protocols we had put in place. In the financial world, news this significant had a way of reaching the right people through unofficial channels, even before the official announcements were made. Penelope, blissfully unaware of the crisis brewing among the senior leadership, continued her breakfast conversation with increasing animation. I watched as she gestured toward the vineyard, clearly discussing the beauty of the venue and the success of the weekend retreat. Her table companions seemed distracted, occasionally glancing toward the executive tables where the real drama was unfolding, but Penelope remained focused on her own performance. At 8:52 a.m., Douglas Richmond stood up and addressed the assembled group. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people, but I could hear an underlying tension that suggested this was not a planned announcement. The terrace fell silent immediately. Coffee cups were set down, conversations ceased, and all eyes turned toward the CEO. Even the servers stopped their movements, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I've just received word that there will be an important company announcement this morning," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd without landing on me. "Due to the sensitive nature of the information, I'm going to ask everyone to return to the main conference room where we can address this properly and ensure that everyone receives accurate information simultaneously." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembled employees. This was clearly not part of the weekend's planned agenda, and the sudden change in atmosphere had transformed what should have been a relaxed farewell breakfast into something that felt much more serious and potentially ominous. "Is everything all right, Mr. Richmond?" called out Jennifer Walsh from her table near the center of the terrace. "Is the company in some kind of trouble?" Douglas raised his hand to quiet the growing whispers. "I can assure you that this is positive news for Meridian Financial Group," he said. "However, given the significance of the announcement and its potential impact on our stock price, we need to handle this through proper channels rather than in an informal setting." I felt every muscle in my body tense as I realized what was happening. Someone, probably a board member or a senior executive, had received advance word about the acquisition announcement that was going live in less than 8 minutes. The carefully planned timeline that was supposed to give us control over how and when the news broke was collapsing, and now Douglas was being forced to manage a crisis situation in real time. As employees began gathering their belongings and moving toward the conference room, I noticed that several people were already checking their phones, trying to find information about what could be significant enough to interrupt their farewell breakfast. The financial news websites would be publishing the press release in exactly 6 minutes, and once that happened, the speculation and rumors would be replaced by the stark reality of what was about to change at Meridian Financial Group. Penelope appeared at my side as I stood to join the exodus toward the conference room. "This is so strange," she said, her voice carrying a note of excitement rather than concern. "I wonder what kind of announcement could be so important that they're interrupting breakfast. Maybe it's a major acquisition or a new partnership deal." I managed to nod non-committally, but inside I was marveling at how close to the truth her speculation actually was. "I suppose we'll find out soon enough," I said. As we walked through the resort's elegant corridors toward the conference room, I could feel the weight of my secret pressing against my chest like a physical force. In less than 5 minutes, my carefully maintained anonymity would be shattered forever. Penelope would discover that her unemployed little sister was about to become one of the most powerful executives in the company she had spent 6 years trying to climb. The hierarchy that had defined our relationship since childhood was about to be completely inverted. The conference room was buzzing with nervous energy as employees filed in and took their seats. I chose a chair near the back, wanting to observe rather than be observed during what I knew would be a moment that none of us would ever forget. Penelope sat several rows ahead of me, still chatting with colleagues about possible explanations for the sudden announcement. At exactly 9 a.m., Douglas Richmond's phone buzzed with the notification that would change everything. I watched his face as he read the message, saw the moment when the full reality of the situation settled over him. He looked up from his phone, scanned the room, and for just a moment, his eyes met mine across the crowded conference room. In that instant, I realized that he knew exactly who I was and where I was sitting. The crisis wasn't just about managing the timing of an announcement. It was about the fact that the person who was about to be introduced as Meridian's new executive director was sitting anonymously in the back of the room, having spent the previous evening being patronized by the very people who would soon be reporting to her. Douglas Richmond stood at the front of the conference room, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks as he wrestled with how to handle a situation that was spiraling beyond his control. The room held nearly 200 Meridian Financial Group employees, all waiting expectantly for an explanation that would make sense of the morning's sudden disruption. I could see him calculating his options, weighing the risks of different approaches to managing what was about to become a very delicate corporate communications challenge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the circumstances, "as I mentioned, we've received some significant news this morning that affects our company's future. However, Before I share the details of this announcement, I want to ensure that we handle this information responsibly and professionally. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see employees exchanging worried glances, their minds racing through possible explanations for the urgent gathering. Near the front of the room, Penelope sat forward in her chair, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. She was clearly hoping that whatever news was coming would somehow reflect positively on her own career prospects. Douglas continued, "What I'm about to share with you has not yet been made public, though it will be within the next few minutes. I'm going to ask that everyone please turn off their phones and refrain from any external communications until we've had a chance to discuss the implications of this announcement." A rustling sound filled the room as people reluctantly powered down their devices. I hesitated for a moment before following suit, knowing that my secure phone contained the very information that Douglas was about to reveal. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. I was probably the only person in the room who already knew exactly what he was going to say. "This morning," Douglas said, "Meridian Financial Group completed the acquisition of Quantum Dynamics Solutions, a financial technology company that has developed revolutionary artificial intelligence systems for risk assessment and market analysis. This acquisition represents the largest single investment in our company's history and positions us at the forefront of the next generation of financial services." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. This was clearly bigger news than anyone had expected. I watched as employees processed the information, some looking excited about the growth opportunity, others appearing concerned about how such a massive acquisition might affect their own positions within the company. But Douglas wasn't finished. "Along with this acquisition," he continued, "we are also announcing several key leadership changes that will take effect immediately. These changes reflect our commitment to integrating the innovative approaches that made Quantum Dynamics Solutions such an attractive acquisition target." I felt my heart rate accelerate as I realized that the moment of truth was approaching far more quickly than I had anticipated. The carefully planned timeline that was supposed to give me time to mentally prepare for this revelation had been compressed into a few minutes of corporate crisis management. "The leadership team of Quantum Dynamics Solutions will be joining Meridian Financial Group in senior executive positions," Douglas said, and I could see him scanning the room again. "However, there appears to be some confusion about the current whereabouts of one of our new executives." That was my cue. I took a deep breath and stood up from my chair in the back of the room. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 200 heads turned toward me in unison, and I could feel the weight of their collective confusion and surprise. Penelope's mouth literally fell open as she stared at me, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to process confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. "Actually, Mr. Richmond," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "I believe there might be some confusion about who exactly needs to be located." I began walking down the center aisle toward the front of the room, feeling every eye tracking my movement. The clicking of my heels against the polished floor seemed unnaturally loud in the absolute silence that had descended over the assembled employees. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued as I approached the podium, "my name is Victoria Ashworth, and I've been serving as the interim Chief Executive Officer of Quantum Dynamics Solutions for the past 8 months. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the distant sound of birds chirping outside the conference room windows. It was the kind of silence that comes when reality shifts so dramatically that people need a moment to recalibrate their understanding of the world around them. Douglas stepped aside to make room for me at the podium, and I could see a mixture of relief and amusement in his expression. "Ms. Ashworth," he said, "thank you for clarifying your location. I believe your colleagues here at Meridian have some questions about your background." I looked out over the sea of stunned faces, my eyes inevitably drawn to Penelope, who appeared to be frozen in a state of complete shock. Her carefully constructed narrative about her struggling sister had just been obliterated by the revelation that the unemployed family member she had been patronizing was actually the CEO of the company that had just been acquired for $2.4 billion. I realize this might come as a surprise to some of you, I said, allowing a slight smile to touch my lips. Particularly to those who met me yesterday as Penelope's sister who was between opportunities. I want to assure you that while my employment status was perhaps misrepresented, my commitment to the success of this merger is absolutely genuine. Jennifer Walsh, who had offered me the administrative support position the night before, looked like she was experiencing some form of cognitive dissonance. Her face had gone pale, and she kept looking back and forth between me and Penelope as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. For those who are wondering about my qualifications, I continued, I founded Quantum Dynamics Solutions 6 years ago while completing my MBA at Wharton. Over the past 2 years, we've grown from a mid-sized startup to the leading provider of AI-driven financial analysis tools in North America. Our client list includes 12 of the top 15 investment banks globally, and our predictive algorithms have consistently outperformed traditional risk assessment methods by margins that industry analysts considered impossible until we proved otherwise. I paused to let that information sink in before continuing. The acquisition announced this morning includes not just our technology and our client relationships, but also our executive team. As part of the merger agreement, I'll be joining Meridian Financial Group as Executive Director of Strategic Innovation, reporting directly to Mr. Richmond. Harrison Blackwell, who had suggested the night before that I needed connections to succeed in the business world, appeared to be struggling with the cognitive shift required to process this information. The man who had offered to help me network my way into a suitable position was now staring at someone who had just been announced as one of the highest-ranking executives in his company. But it was Penelope's reaction that captured most of my attention. She had gone from pale to flushed, to pale again, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the arms of her chair. This wasn't just a professional shock for her. It was a complete inversion of the family dynamic that had defined our relationship for our entire adult lives. I want to address something directly, I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone. Yesterday evening, there was considerable discussion about my employment situation and my need for assistance in finding suitable work. I want to thank everyone who offered their help and support. Your kindness was noted and appreciated, even if the circumstances were not quite what they appeared to be. The room remained silent, but I could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they remembered their conversations with me and began to understand how dramatically they had misjudged the situation. However, I continued, I also want to be clear about something. The reason I didn't correct these misunderstandings yesterday was not because I was embarrassed about my position at Quantum Dynamics Solutions. It was because I wanted to observe how Meridian Financial Group operates at all levels, how information flows through the organization, how decisions are made, and most importantly, how people treat each other when they believe there's nothing to be gained from the interaction. I could see understanding beginning to dawn on several faces as people realized that they had been unknowingly auditioning for me while thinking they were doing me a favor. The silence that had settled over the conference room was broken by the sound of a chair scraping harshly against the floor. Penelope had stood up abruptly, her face flushed with what I recognized as the particular combination of humiliation and rage that had characterized her worst moments since childhood. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and I could see her chest rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to process what had just happened to her carefully constructed world. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned quiet like a blade. "This is some kind of mistake or elaborate joke." She gestured wildly toward me, standing at the podium where moments before she had probably imagined herself delivering her own triumphant announcements someday. "You're telling me that my unemployed sister, who's been living off savings for 8 months, is suddenly the CEO of some company worth billions of dollars?" The room remained frozen, 200 pairs of eyes bouncing between Penelope and me like spectators at a tennis match where the stakes were measured in careers and reputations rather than points and games. I could see Douglas Richmond's face tighten with concern as he realized that what should have been a straightforward corporate announcement was rapidly devolving into a very public family drama. "Penelope," I said quietly, trying to project calm authority while my heart hammered against my ribs, "perhaps we should discuss this privately after." "No," she interrupted, her voice rising to a pitch that made several people in the front row wince. "We're going to discuss this right here, right now, in front of everyone who spent last night listening to you be introduced as my charity case sister who needed help finding work." She began pacing back and forth in the small space between her row of chairs and the one in front of it, her movements sharp and agitated. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? Do you understand that everyone in this room now thinks I'm either a liar or an idiot? That I spent an entire evening talking about my poor struggling sister while she was apparently some kind of secret business mogul?" The cruelty in her voice was familiar, but the public nature of it was something new. In private, Penelope had always been capable of cutting remarks designed to establish her superiority, but she had never before been willing to humiliate me quite so openly. The revelation of my true position had clearly triggered something deeper than simple embarrassment. It had exposed the fundamental insecurity that drove all of her need to diminish others. "Everyone here heard me give that speech last night," she continued, her voice gaining momentum as her anger built. "They heard me talk about how this company believes in lifting people up, about how successful people have a responsibility to help those who haven't been as fortunate. And the whole time, you were sitting there letting me make a fool of myself." Jennifer Walsh had turned completely around in her chair to watch the confrontation, her face a mixture of fascination and horror. This was the kind of corporate drama that would be discussed in whispered conversations for years to come. The story that would be told and retold every time someone wanted to illustrate the dangers of making assumptions about people based on appearances. "You're not qualified for this," Penelope said, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "I don't care what kind of elaborate story you and Mr. Richmond have cooked up, but you don't just become an executive director of a major financial firm overnight. You don't have the experience, you don't have the background, and you certainly don't have the credibility to walk into my company and pretend to be my superior." The possessive pronoun hung in the air like a challenge. My company. She had just claimed ownership of Meridian Financial Group in front of 200 witnesses, including the actual owner who was standing less than 10 feet away from her. The desperation in her voice was becoming more apparent with each word, as if she could somehow argue her way back to a reality where she remained the successful sister and I remained the failure. 6 years, she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that made me feel sick to my stomach. "I've been working at this company for 6 years. I've built relationships, I've proven myself, I've earned the respect of everyone in this room. You can't just walk in here with some story about a startup company and expect people to accept that you outrank me." Douglas Richmond stepped forward, his face grave. "Miss Hart," he said formally, "I understand that this announcement has come as a shock, but I'm going to need you to lower your voice and show appropriate respect for—" "Don't," Penelope snapped, whirling to face him. "Don't you dare lecture me about respect when you've obviously been conspiring with my sister to humiliate me in front of my colleagues. How long have you known? How long have you been planning this little revelation?" The accusation of conspiracy was so wildly off base that I almost laughed, but the pain in Penelope's voice stopped me. This wasn't just anger. This was the sound of someone watching their entire identity crumble in real time. For 6 years, she had built her self-worth around being the successful Hart sister, the one who had figured out how to navigate the corporate world while I floundered in uncertainty. Now that foundation was being torn away, and she was lashing out at anyone within reach. "This is a fraud," she said, turning back to me with desperation plain on her face. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're not going to destroy my career just because you're jealous of what I've accomplished. Everyone in this room knows who you really are. They met you yesterday. They saw you sitting at the family table while I was networking with the senior partners." She gestured toward the executives who had been present at the dinner, as if calling them as witnesses to some crime. "Tell them," she demanded, looking at Jennifer Walsh. "Tell them about how you offered her an administrative support position because that's the kind of work she's qualified for. Tell them about how she was grateful for any opportunity to get her foot in the door." Jennifer Walsh looked like she would rather be anywhere else on Earth, but Penelope's expectant stare forced her to respond. I did mention that we might have an opening," she said carefully, "but given the new information about Ms. Ashworth's background." "What new information?" Penelope interrupted. "A story? A claim? Anyone can claim to be the CEO of some company that nobody's ever heard of. Where's the proof? Where are the credentials? Where's the documentation that shows she's anything more than an unemployed woman who's finally decided to stop pretending she's too good for real work?" The room had gone completely silent again, but this time it was the kind of silence that preceded an explosion. I could see people throughout the audience beginning to realize that they were witnessing something that went far beyond corporate politics or family dynamics. This was a complete psychological breakdown, a public dissolution of someone who had invested so much of their identity in being superior to me that they couldn't survive the revelation that the foundation of that superiority was built on a lie. "You want proof, Penelope?" I asked quietly, my voice carrying easily in the silence. "You want documentation?" I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, turning it on despite Douglas's earlier request for everyone to keep their devices powered down. Within seconds, I had accessed my secure email and pulled up the signed merger agreement with its official letterhead and legal seals. "Here's the signed acquisition agreement," I said, holding up the phone so she could see the screen. "Here's the board resolution appointing me as executive director. Here's the press release that went live 20 minutes ago, announcing the deal to the financial press." But even as I offered the proof she had demanded, I could see that evidence wasn't really what she wanted. What she wanted was for reality to be different, for the world to rearrange itself back into a shape where she remained the successful sister and I remained the failure who needed her help. "I don't care what documents you've fabricated," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't care what story you've convinced these people to believe. You're not better than me, you're not smarter than me, and you're sure as hell not going to be my boss." The final word came out as almost a whisper, and I realized that we had reached the heart of what was really destroying her. It wasn't just that I had been secretly successful. It was that my success now placed me in a position of authority over her, inverting every assumption about our relative worth that had shaped our relationship since childhood. The conference room had devolved into the kind of uncomfortable silence that follows a public breakdown, with 200 people trying to pretend they weren't witnessing something that would fundamentally alter the power dynamics of their workplace. Penelope stood frozen in the space between the chairs, her chest heaving as she stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and rage that seemed to distort her features. The elegant professional facade she had cultivated so carefully over 6 years had cracked completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. It was at that moment that Margaret Sinclair, the senior partner's wife who had offered me her condescending sympathy the night before, reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Unlike the rest of us, she had apparently ignored Douglas Richmond's request to power down devices, and now she was staring at her screen with an expression of dawning comprehension. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's true. It's all true." Every head in the room turned toward her, including Penelope's. Margaret's face had gone pale as she scrolled through what appeared to be a news article, her finger moving rapidly across the screen as she absorbed information that was clearly shocking her into silence. "Margaret," her husband Robert called from across the room, his voice tight with concern. "What is it?" She looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with the kind of amazement that comes from witnessing something that defies all expectations. "The Wall Street Journal just published a breaking news alert," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Meridian Financial Group has acquired Quantum Dynamics Solutions for $2.4 billion in the largest fintech acquisition of the year." The room erupted in surprised murmurs, but Margaret wasn't finished. She was still reading from her phone, her voice taking on the cadence of someone delivering momentous news. The article says that QDS was founded and led by Victoria Ashworth, described as, quote, 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 one of the most innovative minds in financial technology. It says she's being appointed as Meridian's new Executive Director of Strategic Innovation, making her the youngest senior executive in the company's history. Penelope's face had gone from flushed to completely white. "No," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. That can't be right." But Margaret was still reading, her voice growing more amazed with each detail. According to the article, QDS's artificial intelligence systems have revolutionized risk assessment in investment banking. Their client list includes Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan Chase. She paused, looking up at me with something approaching awe. "Victoria, it says here that your company's algorithms predicted the 2023 market correction with 94% accuracy 3 months before it happened." Jennifer Walsh had pulled out her own phone and was frantically searching for additional information. "Bloomberg is running the story too," she called out. "They're calling it the acquisition that will reshape financial services." There's a quote here from the CEO of Deutsche Bank, calling Victoria's work, quote, groundbreaking and industry-defining. David Chen, the senior vice president who had been so politely dismissive of me the night before, was now reading from his tablet with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Forbes published a profile of Victoria 6 months ago," he said, his voice growing quieter as he processed the information. "The quiet revolutionary, how Victoria Ashworth built a billion-dollar company while everyone was looking the other way. It says she was named to their, quote, 30 under 30 feet list, 3 years running." The cascade of external validation was overwhelming, but it was also having the effect I had hoped for. These weren't just my claims anymore. They were being verified by every major financial publication in real time. The story was spreading across the industry at the speed of digital media, and within minutes, everyone in the room would have access to more information about my background than they could possibly absorb. Harrison Blackwell, who had suggested I needed better connections to succeed in business, was staring at his phone screen with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "LinkedIn shows her as CEO of Quantum Dynamics Solutions for the past 3 years, he said slowly. Before that, she was Vice President of Innovation at Clearwater Financial. Before that, she completed her MBA at Wharton, with a concentration in financial technology, and graduated summa cum laude." The accumulating evidence was creating a momentum that even Penelope couldn't ignore. With each new detail that emerged from the phones and tablets around the room, her position became more untenable. This wasn't a story I had fabricated or a conspiracy I had orchestrated. This was documented reality being confirmed by sources that were beyond question or manipulation. Rachel Manning, the research department employee who had spoken to me sympathetically the night before, was reading from what appeared to be an academic journal on her phone. "She's published 17 peer-reviewed papers on financial modeling and artificial intelligence," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Her work on predictive market analysis is cited in graduate programs at Harvard Business School, Stanford, and MIT." But it was Patricia Hendricks, the chief operating officer, who delivered the piece of information that finally broke through Penelope's denial. She had been making phone calls rather than reading news articles, and now she approached Douglas Richmond with a look of professional urgency. "I just spoke with our head of technology acquisition," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "He confirmed that our due diligence team has been working with Victoria's company for 18 months. She personally led the presentations to our board of directors. The acquisition was unanimously approved based on her technology and her leadership capabilities." She turned to address the room directly. "Our internal analysis shows that integrating QDS's systems could increase our risk assessment accuracy by 40% and potentially save us hundreds of millions in avoided bad investments. Victoria's algorithms are already being used by 12 of our largest competitors." The weight of institutional validation was crushing. This wasn't just media reports or academic credentials. This was confirmation from within Meridian Financial Group itself that I was exactly who I claimed to be, and that my value to the company was measured not in potential but in proven performance. Douglas Richmond stepped forward, and I could see him making the calculation that the situation required decisive leadership rather than diplomatic ambiguity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years managing corporate crises, "I want to address this situation directly." He gestured toward me with unmistakable respect. Victoria Ashworth is one of the most accomplished financial technology executives of her generation. Our acquisition of Quantum Dynamics Solutions represents the largest single investment in innovation in Meridian's history, and her appointment as executive director is the result of the most thorough vetting process our board has ever conducted. He paused, his eyes finding Penelope in the crowd. The fact that some of us were unaware of her credentials when we met her yesterday speaks to her discretion and professionalism, not to any deficiency in her qualifications. She chose to observe our company culture before revealing her position, which demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking that made her acquisition target so valuable. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the respectful silence that comes when people realize they are in the presence of someone whose achievements far exceed anything they had previously imagined possible. The phones and tablets had done what my words alone could not. They had transformed me from Penelope's struggling sister into Victoria Ashworth, the financial technology innovator whose work was reshaping an entire industry. Penelope stood motionless in the center of it all, her face cycling through emotions too complex to untangle. The external validation had made denial impossible, but acceptance seemed equally difficult for someone whose entire sense of self had been built on the assumption of her superiority over me. "I don't understand," she finally whispered, her voice so quiet that people in the back of the room had to strain to hear her. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell our family? Why did you let everyone think you were a failure?" The questions hung in the air like an admission of everything that had gone wrong between us, and I realized that we had finally reached the moment where the real conversation could begin. Penelope's whispered questions hung in the air between us, and I could see in her eyes the exact moment when the full magnitude of the role reversal finally penetrated her consciousness. This wasn't just about me having a secret job, or even about me being successful in ways she hadn't understood. This was about the complete inversion of every assumption that had governed our relationship since we were children. I took a step closer to her, my voice gentle but clear enough for the entire room to hear. "The reason I didn't tell you, Penelope, is because you stopped listening to me a long time ago. Every conversation we've had for the past 6 years has been about your achievements, your promotions, your networking successes. When I tried to share what I was working on, you dismissed it as playing with computers or startup nonsense." The room remained absolutely silent, but I could feel the shift in energy as people began to understand that they were witnessing something much deeper than a corporate announcement or even a family argument. They were watching the unraveling of a dynamic that had shaped two people's lives for decades. "Do you remember last Christmas?" I continued, my voice carrying a sadness that I hadn't intended to reveal. "When I mentioned that I was working on some interesting projects in financial technology, you laughed and said that I should focus on getting a real job instead of chasing fantasies. You told Mom and Dad that I needed to be more practical, more like you." Penelope's face crumpled as the memory clearly came back to her. I could see her replaying that conversation, understanding for the first time what she had actually dismissed. At the time, I had been 3 months into negotiations with Meridian Financial Group's technology acquisition team. But to her, I had been a delusional younger sister who needed guidance about how the real world worked. "The startup nonsense you were so concerned about," I said, gesturing around the room filled with her colleagues, "generated $847 million in revenue last year. The computer games you thought I was wasting time on are now being used by every major investment bank in North America to prevent catastrophic financial losses." Douglas Richmond stepped forward with a tablet in his hand, his face showing the kind of professional excitement that comes from discussing truly impressive business metrics. Perhaps some specific numbers would help illustrate the scope of Victoria's achievements, he said, looking at the assembled employees with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver exceptional news. Quantum Dynamics Solutions currently manages risk assessment for investment portfolios worth a combined $2.8 trillion, he announced. Their artificial intelligence systems process more than 14 million transactions daily, identifying potential risks that traditional analysis methods miss entirely. He swiped to another screen on his tablet. In the 18 months that our competitors have been using QDS technology, they've avoided an estimated $12 billion in losses that would have occurred using conventional risk models. Victoria's algorithms predicted the failure of cryptocurrency exchange collapse 6 weeks before it happened, saving their clients $400 million in exposure. The numbers were landing like physical blows, and I could see Penelope struggling to reconcile this version of me with the sister she had been patronizing for years. Each statistic was a revelation that forced her to recalculate not just my current position, but everything she thought she knew about my capabilities and ambitions. But the technology is only part of the story, Douglas continued, clearly enjoying the opportunity to present what was obviously one of the most successful acquisitions in the company's history. Victoria's leadership style and business philosophy have created a company culture that's become a model for the entire fintech industry. He gestured toward me with unmistakable respect. She's been featured in Harvard Business Review for her innovative approach to team management. McKinsey & Company published a case study on QDS's organizational structure. And last month, she delivered the keynote address at the Global Financial Innovation Summit, where she presented to an audience that included the CEOs of 16 Fortune 500 companies. Jennifer Walsh, who had offered me an administrative support position just 20 hours earlier, was staring at me with an expression that suggested she was experiencing some form of professional vertigo. The woman she had thought was suitable for entry-level clerical work had apparently been addressing audiences of industry titans, while she was making small talk about filing systems and coffee duties. The executive director position that Victoria will be assuming, Douglas continued, carries direct oversight responsibility for all technology integration across our global operations. This includes supervision of our risk management department, our innovation labs, and our client analysis systems. He paused, letting the implications of that statement settle over the room. In practical terms, this means that Victoria will have executive authority over approximately 40% of our company's operations, with a budget allocation of $1.2 billion annually. The silence that followed was different from the stunned quiet that had characterized the earlier part of the morning. This was the silence of people performing rapid mental calculations, recalibrating their understanding of corporate hierarchy and trying to figure out how this massive shift in power structure would affect their own positions and career prospects. But for Penelope, the calculations were much more personal and devastating. I could see her processing not just the professional implications, but the realization that every assumption she had made about our relative worth had been not just wrong but spectacularly inverted. "Your budget," she said quietly, the words coming out like a question even though she clearly understood the statement. "Your annual budget is larger than our entire department's revenue target." "Significantly larger," I confirmed gently. "And you report directly to Mr. Richmond." "I do." "Which means," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would acknowledge the complete reversal of our positions. "Which means that in the corporate hierarchy you care so much about," I said, completing her thought with as much kindness as I could manage, "I'm now several levels above you." The words hung in the air like a death knell for the dynamic that had defined our relationship since we were teenagers. Penelope had built her identity around being the successful sister, the one who understood how the world worked, the one who had connections and influence while I struggled to find my place. Now, in the space of a single morning, that entire framework had been obliterated. The senior partners you were so impressed with last night, I continued, will be attending weekly status meetings, where I present strategic technology initiatives to the board of directors. The networking events you thought I needed to learn about are now part of my regular responsibilities. The connections you believed I was lacking include partnerships with companies and institutions that most people in this room will never have access to. David Chen, who had been so politely dismissive when Penelope introduced me as her struggling sister, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Victoria," he said, his tone completely transformed from the condescending politeness of the night before. "I want to apologize for any misunderstanding about your background yesterday evening. Had I known about your position and achievements, our conversation would obviously have been very different." The apology was sincere, but it also highlighted exactly what I had observed during my evening of anonymity. These people were capable of respect and professional courtesy, but only when they believed it served their interests. When they thought I was nobody important, they had treated me with the kind of polite dismissal that revealed their true character. "That's exactly why I didn't identify myself immediately," I said, addressing not just David but the entire room. "I wanted to understand how Meridian Financial Group operates when people believe there's nothing to be gained from the interaction. I wanted to see how decisions are made, how information flows, and how people treat each other when they think nobody important is watching." The implications of that statement rippled through the room like a shockwave. Every conversation from the previous evening was now being re-examined through the lens of someone who had been evaluating them while they thought they were evaluating her. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been completely inverted retroactively. Penelope looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, finally understanding that her moment of triumph had been built on a foundation that was already crumbling before she had even begun to speak. The weight of revelation settled over the conference room like a heavy blanket, and I could see Penelope struggling to process not just the facts of my position, but the deeper implications of what my secrecy meant about our relationship. Her face had gone through several transformations over the past hour, from confident dismissal to angry denial to stunned disbelief. But now I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine pain. "Victoria," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "why didn't you trust me?" The question cut through all the corporate posturing and professional revelations, striking at the heart of what had really been broken between us. This wasn't just about job titles or company hierarchies. This was about the fundamental failure of communication that had been building between us for years. Douglas Richmond seemed to sense that the conversation was moving into territory that required privacy. "Perhaps," he said diplomatically, "we should adjourn this meeting and allow everyone to process this information. Victoria, if you and your sister would like to use my office to continue your discussion." "No," Penelope said sharply, then caught herself and modulated her tone. "I mean, thank you, Mr. Richmond, but if we're going to have this conversation, I think it should be here, in front of everyone who witnessed what happened last night." She turned to face me fully, and I could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You let me stand up in front of 200 people and give a speech about how successful people have a responsibility to help those who haven't been as fortunate. You let me talk about mentorship and guidance and lifting people up while you sat there knowing that you were about to become one of the most powerful executives in this company." Her voice was growing stronger, but I could hear the hurt underneath the anger. "Do you have any idea how that makes me look? How it makes me feel? Everyone in this room heard me patronize you. They heard me offer to help you network your way into a suitable position. They watched me position myself as the successful sister who was generous enough to bring her struggling family member to a corporate event." Jennifer Walsh shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly remembering her own offer to find me administrative work. Around the room, I could see similar expressions of discomfort as people recalled their own interactions with me from the previous evening. They were all complicit in the assumptions that had made Penelope's speech possible. "But that's just it, Penelope," I said, finally finding the words to address the deeper issue that had been festering between us for years. "You didn't know I was struggling because you never asked. You assumed I was failing because that fit the narrative you needed to maintain about yourself. I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice but speaking clearly enough that everyone could still hear. When was the last time you called me to ask how I was doing? Not to tell me about your latest promotion or your newest client, but to actually listen to what was happening in my life. The question hung in the air, and I could see Penelope's face cycling through memories as she tried to recall a conversation that met that description. The silence stretched long enough that the answer became obvious to everyone in the room. You've been so invested in being the successful sister that you never considered the possibility that I might be successful too, just in ways you didn't recognize or understand, I continued. Every family gathering, every phone call, every interaction we've had has been about establishing your position as the one who made it while I was still trying to figure things out. Rachel Manning, who had spoken to me sympathetically the night before about Penelope's protective attitude, was watching our exchange with the fascination of someone finally understanding a dynamic she had observed but never fully comprehended. This wasn't just about corporate success. This was about years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. At Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I said, my voice taking on the weight of specific, painful memories. You spent 20 minutes telling everyone about your promotion to senior account manager. When I mentioned that I was excited about a project I was working on, you interrupted me to ask Mom to pass the cranberry sauce. You literally changed the subject rather than listen to what I was trying to share. Penelope's face crumpled as the memory clearly came back to her. I thought you were talking about some hobby project. You were always working on things that never seemed to go anywhere. That hobby project was the initial prototype for the risk assessment algorithm that's now being used by half the investment banks in the country, I said quietly. But you never asked for details. You never asked to see what I was building or how it worked or why I was excited about it. You just assumed it was another one of my failures and moved on to talking about something that actually mattered, your career. The specificity of the example was devastating because it highlighted a pattern that everyone in the room could recognize. How many times had each of them dismissed someone's enthusiasm because it didn't fit their understanding of what success looked like? How many conversations had they redirected away from topics that seemed unimportant, only to discover later that they had missed something significant? And last Christmas, I continued, the pain in my voice becoming more evident as I worked through years of accumulated dismissal. When I tried to explain what I was working on, you told Dad that I needed to be more realistic about my career prospects. You said I was chasing fantasies and that someone needed to have a serious conversation with me about getting a real job. Penelope closed her eyes, clearly remembering the conversation and understanding for the first time how her words had landed. Victoria, I was trying to protect you. I thought you were setting yourself up for disappointment. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice rising slightly as years of frustration finally found an outlet. From pursuing work that I was passionate about? From building something innovative and meaningful? Or from succeeding in ways that might threaten your position as the family success story? The accusation was harsh, but it struck at the truth that had been underlying all of our interactions. Penelope's concern for my career had always been filtered through her own need to maintain her status as the sister who had figured everything out. That's not fair, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I wanted you to succeed. I just thought you were taking unnecessary risks. You wanted me to succeed in ways that you could understand and control, I corrected. You wanted me to get a job at a company like this one, work my way up through traditional channels, and maybe eventually reach a position that would make you proud to introduce me at events like last night's dinner. I gestured around the room, where her colleagues were listening to every word of our exchange. But you never considered that I might already be successful on a scale that dwarfed anything you had achieved. You never asked because you were afraid of what you might discover. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Everyone in the room was processing not just the specifics of our family dynamic, but the broader implications for their own relationships and assumptions. How many times had they dismissed people or ideas because they didn't fit their preconceived notions of what success looked like? "I didn't tell you about quantum dynamics solutions," I said, my voice becoming gentler as I saw the genuine pain in Penelope's eyes, because I was tired of having my achievements minimized or explained away. I was tired of watching you change the subject every time I tried to share something I was proud of. I was tired of being the family project, the sister who needed guidance and protection and careful management. Penelope was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of our relationship's dysfunction finally became clear to her. "I never meant to make you feel small," she whispered. "I thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good big sister." "I know," I said, and I could feel my own voice breaking slightly. But the help I needed wasn't career advice or networking opportunities. What I needed was for someone in my family to believe that I was capable of achieving something significant on my own terms, in my own way, without needing to be rescued or redirected or managed. The confession hung between us like a bridge that could either connect us or collapse under the weight of everything that had gone wrong. Around us, 200 people sat in absolute silence, witnessing a moment of truth that was both deeply personal and universally recognizable. The emotional weight of our confrontation had created a kind of sacred space in the conference room, where 200 people sat as witnesses to something they recognized as both deeply personal and profoundly universal. Penelope stood before me with tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed professional persona completely stripped away to reveal someone who was finally seeing the damage that years of assumptions and dismissals had created. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I thought I was being the responsible one, the practical one. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. But I was really protecting myself from having to acknowledge that you might be more successful than me." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way that our conversations hadn't been in years. I could see the moment when she fully grasped not just what she had done to me, but what she had done to herself, how her need to maintain superiority had blinded her to the achievements of someone she claimed to love. Douglas Richmond stepped forward, his voice gentle but carrying the authority of someone who understood that this moment required careful handling. "Victoria," he said, "I think this would be an appropriate time to address the practical implications of this morning's announcement. Your colleagues," he gestured toward the assembled employees, "deserve to understand what this transition means for the company's operations." I nodded, grateful for the opportunity to channel the emotional intensity of the morning into something productive. The personal healing between Penelope and me would take time, but right now, 200 people needed clarity about how their professional world was about to change. "Thank you, Mr. Richmond," I said, wiping away tears I hadn't realized were falling. I walked back to the podium, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, but this time the attention felt different. These people weren't looking at me as Penelope's charity case sister. They were looking at me as their new executive director, someone whose decisions would affect their careers and their company's future. "I know this morning has been overwhelming for everyone," I began, my voice finding the steady, authoritative tone I used in boardrooms and investor meetings. "The revelation about my background has created confusion and, frankly, some uncomfortable realizations about assumptions we all make about people based on limited information." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room, making contact with many of the individuals who had interacted with me the night before. "But I want to address something directly. The way you treated me yesterday evening, both the kindness and the condescension, tells me everything I need to know about how Meridian Financial Group operates as an organization." Jennifer Walsh shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly remembering her offer of administrative work. David Chen was staring at his hands, probably replaying his dismissive comments about networking and connections. Throughout the room, I could see people mentally reviewing their interactions with me, understanding that they had been unknowingly auditioning for someone they thought was beneath their notice. The administrative support position that was offered to me last night, I continued, my voice carrying a note of gentle humor, was offered with genuine kindness by people who thought they were helping someone in need. That speaks well of Meridian's culture, even if the assumptions underlying the offer were incorrect. I could see relief on several faces as people realized I wasn't going to use my new position to punish them for their misjudgments. This was leadership in action, the ability to acknowledge problems while focusing on solutions rather than retribution. However, I continued, my tone becoming more serious, what I observed yesterday also revealed some concerning patterns about how information flows through this organization and how decisions are made about people's potential based on superficial characteristics rather than actual capabilities. The room had fallen silent again, but this time it was the focused silence of people listening to feedback that would shape their future behavior. I was using the morning's revelations as a teachable moment, transforming our family drama into a broader lesson about corporate culture and professional judgment. Starting next week, when I officially begin my role as Executive Director of Strategic Innovation, one of my first initiatives will be implementing new protocols for talent identification and development. We're going to examine how we evaluate potential in people who don't fit traditional molds. And we're going to create pathways for innovation that don't require people to prove themselves through conventional channels. Douglas Richmond was nodding approvingly, clearly pleased that I was channeling this morning's chaos into concrete organizational improvements. This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had made quantum dynamic solutions so valuable. The ability to see systemic problems and develop innovative solutions. The financial technology industry is changing rapidly, I continued, and companies that rely too heavily on traditional indicators of success are going to be left behind. We need to identify and nurture talent wherever we find it, regardless of whether it comes packaged in the form we expect. I gestured toward Penelope, who was still standing near her chair, her face showing a mixture of pride and lingering embarrassment. My sister's assessment of my career prospects was based on conventional wisdom about how success should look and develop. She wasn't wrong to value stability and traditional achievement markers. Those things matter. But she was wrong to assume that unconventional paths couldn't lead to extraordinary outcomes. The comment was both a gentle criticism and an olive branch, acknowledging Penelope's perspective while establishing the lesson that needed to be learned. I could see her straightening slightly, recognizing that I was offering her a way to save face while still addressing the underlying issues that had created this morning's crisis. The integration of quantum dynamic solutions technology into Meridian's operations is going to require exactly this kind of thinking, I said, building toward the practical implications that would affect everyone in the room. We're going to be working with artificial intelligence systems that identify patterns and opportunities that human analysis might miss. We're going to be partnering with companies and individuals who may not look like traditional financial services professionals, but who are developing the tools that will define our industry's future. Rachel Manning was taking notes, clearly recognizing that she was hearing a preview of strategic changes that would reshape her department's work. Around the room, other employees were beginning to understand that this wasn't just a personnel announcement. It was the beginning of a fundamental transformation in how Meridian Financial Group approached innovation and growth. I want to be clear about something, I said, my voice taking on the tone of someone making a commitment that would be remembered and measured. The respect and authority that come with my new position are earned through performance, not granted through titles. Over the next several months, I'm going to prove that the board's confidence in me was justified by delivering results that benefit everyone in this room. The statement was both humble and confident, acknowledging that executive authority meant nothing without the ability to produce outcomes that justified people's trust. It was also a direct response to the morning's power dynamics, establishing that I understood the responsibility that came with the role reversal everyone had witnessed. The algorithms and systems that Quantum Dynamics Solutions has developed will be integrated across all of Meridian's operations over the next 18 months, I continued, outlining the timeline that would affect everyone's daily work. This means that every department will be working with new tools, new metrics, and new approaches to risk assessment and client analysis. I could see the mixture of excitement and apprehension that always accompanied major technological changes in traditional organizations. People were recognizing that their jobs would be transformed, but they weren't yet sure whether that transformation would make their work easier or more complicated. But more importantly, I concluded, this integration represents an opportunity for everyone in this room to participate in revolutionizing how financial services operates. The systems we're implementing will give you capabilities that your competitors can only dream of, and the insights you'll gain will make you more valuable professionals regardless of where your careers take you. The conference room erupted in applause, not the polite, obligatory applause of corporate events, but the genuine enthusiasm of people who had just heard a vision for their future that was both ambitious and achievable. I had successfully transformed the morning's emotional chaos into strategic clarity, giving everyone a framework for understanding how the personal drama they had witnessed connected to their professional opportunities. 6 months later, I stood in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor of Meridian Financial Group's headquarters in downtown San Francisco, looking out over a city that had become the backdrop for the most transformative period of both my professional and personal life. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bay, where container ships moved like slow-motion chess pieces across water that reflected the late afternoon sun in shades of gold and copper. The quarterly board meeting had just concluded, and the numbers we had presented were beyond even my most optimistic projections. The integration of quantum dynamics solutions technology had not only met every benchmark we had established, it had exceeded them by margins that were forcing the entire financial services industry to recalculate their assumptions about what was possible in risk assessment and predictive analysis. Douglas Richmond approached me with the satisfied expression of a CEO who had just overseen one of the most successful acquisitions in his company's 150-year history. "Victoria," he said, extending his hand for a congratulatory handshake, "I want you to know that the board is unanimously pleased with the progress we've made. The technology integration has exceeded every projection, and your leadership during this transition has been exemplary." I accepted his handshake with genuine gratitude, but also with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've delivered on promises that seemed impossibly ambitious when you first made them. "Thank you, Douglas. I think we've proven that unconventional approaches can produce conventional results, even when those results happen to be revolutionary." He laughed at the paradox, but I could see in his eyes the deeper appreciation for how dramatically the company's culture had shifted over the past 6 months. The protocols I had implemented for identifying and nurturing talent had already produced 3 major innovations from employees who had previously been overlooked for advancement opportunities. The artificial intelligence systems were now processing more data and identifying more profitable opportunities than our human analysts had managed in the previous decade combined. But the most significant transformation hadn't been technological. It had been cultural. Meridian Financial Group had evolved from a traditional investment firm that rewarded conventional achievement into an organization that actively sought out innovative thinking, regardless of where it originated or how it was packaged. "There's someone here to see you," Douglas said, gesturing toward the conference room door where I could see a familiar figure waiting in the hallway. "I believe she has some news to share." Penelope stepped into the room, and I was struck immediately by how different she looked from the woman who had stood in that resort conference room 6 months ago, publicly unraveling as her worldview collapsed around her. She carried herself with a confidence that seemed more genuine than the performative authority she had displayed during our family reunion weekend. Her smile was warm and unguarded, in a way that I hadn't seen since we were children. "Congratulations," she said, approaching me with arms extended for a hug that felt natural rather than obligatory. "I heard about the McKinsey case study and the Harvard Business School curriculum inclusion. You're officially famous now." I accepted her embrace with genuine affection, marveling at how much our relationship had healed over the past months. The process hadn't been easy or immediate. We had spent hours in difficult conversations, working through years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. But something fundamental had shifted between us. creating space for the kind of mutual respect and authentic support that had been missing from our relationship since we were teenagers. "What's your news?" I asked, settling into one of the leather chairs that surrounded the conference table. "Douglas said you had something to share." Penelope's smile broadened, and I could see excitement dancing in her eyes. "I got the promotion," she said, "Director of Client Innovation. They created the position specifically for me, based on the work I've been doing with the new risk assessment protocols." The news filled me with genuine pride, but also with a deeper satisfaction that came from knowing that Penelope's success was being built on her own merits, rather than on her ability to diminish others. Over the past 6 months, she had thrown herself into understanding and implementing the quantum dynamics solutions technology with the same intensity she had once directed toward traditional networking and corporate advancement. "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it completely. "Tell me about the position." "I'll be working directly with our highest value clients to implement customized applications of your artificial intelligence systems," she explained, her enthusiasm evident in every word. "Instead of selling them standard investment products, I'll be designing personalized risk management strategies based on their specific portfolios and market exposures." I could see how perfectly the role suited her particular combination of relationship skills and analytical capabilities. She had always been gifted at understanding what clients needed and translating complex financial concepts into accessible terms. Now she would be doing that work with tools that could provide insights no traditional investment advisor could match. "The best part," she continued, "is that the position reports directly to your Strategic Innovation Department, so we'll be working together on the same initiatives, just from different angles." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 6 months ago, the idea of working together would have been impossible, because our relationship was built on competition and hierarchy. Now, with those dynamics resolved, we could collaborate as equals who brought complementary strengths to shared objectives. "How do you feel about that?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective on our new professional relationship. Penelope considered the question seriously before answering. "Honestly, I'm excited. For the first time in years, I feel like we're on the same team instead of competing in some game where only one of us could win." Her answer captured something essential about what had changed between us. The zero-sum thinking that had characterized our relationship, where my success somehow diminished hers, or her achievements required my failure, had been replaced by a collaborative dynamic where our different talents could enhance each other's work. "I owe you an apology," she said, her tone becoming more serious. "Not just for that weekend at the resort, but for years of making you feel like you had to choose between being successful and being my sister." I felt tears threatening at the corners of my eyes as I recognized the depth of understanding in her words. She wasn't just apologizing for specific incidents. She was acknowledging the fundamental dynamic that had poisoned our relationship and committing to building something better. "I accept your apology," I said quietly, "but I also want to thank you." She looked surprised. "Thank me for what?" "For pushing me to prove myself," I said. "Your skepticism about my unconventional career choices forced me to be more rigorous about documenting my achievements and more strategic about building credibility. If you had supported me unconditionally from the beginning, I might never have developed the resilience I needed to succeed at this level." It was a generous interpretation of our difficult history, but it was also truthful. The adversity I had faced within my own family had prepared me for the challenges of building a company and navigating corporate politics in ways that unconditional support might not have. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the city where both of our careers were now flourishing in ways we couldn't have imagined a year ago. The late afternoon light was beginning to fade, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that reflected off the glass towers of the financial district. "Mom called yesterday," Penelope said, breaking the silence with a smile. "She said she's planning a family dinner next month to celebrate both of our promotions. She wants to invite Aunt Celia and Uncle Robert and basically everyone who was at the reunion last year." I laughed. Imagining our mother's pride at being able to showcase both daughters as success stories, rather than having to manage the awkward dynamics that had characterized previous family gatherings. That sounds perfect, though I suspect the conversation might be a little different this time. Definitely, Penelope agreed. Though I think it will be different in good ways. Dad said he's been reading about artificial intelligence in financial services, trying to understand what you've built. He actually bought a subscription to Harvard Business Review so he could read your article. The image of our practical, numbers-focused father wrestling with academic business theory because he wanted to understand my work was both touching and amusing. It represented exactly the kind of effort to bridge understanding that had been missing from our family dynamics for years. As we prepared to leave the conference room, I realized that the story that had begun with my sister's attempt to humiliate me had evolved into something much more valuable. A template for how relationships could be rebuilt when people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to doing better. The transformation hadn't just been professional. It had been personal, familial, and ultimately, it had been proof that even the most damaged dynamics could be healed when people chose understanding over superiority, collaboration over competition, and authentic connection over performative success. Walking out of that conference room together, both of us heading to our respective corners of the same innovative company, I felt something I hadn't experienced since we were children: the genuine pride of having a sister whose achievements I could celebrate without reservation, and whose respect I had earned not through struggle or competition, but through the simple act of becoming the best version of myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.